11,400,000 is unaccounted for, Anara, and every authorization trail in this room leads back to your name. Lachlan Drexel, 42-year-old Chief Executive Officer of Drexel Capital Group and husband of Anara Weld Drexel, dropped a manila folder onto the contract signing table before the room had fully quieted. The gala was supposed to celebrate the company's largest acquisition closing of the year. Instead, the food sat untouched at every setting. Bex Horn, 31-year-old Vice President of Business Development at Drexel Capital and Lachlan's mistress, occupied the chair that had been Anara's seat for the past 6 years of company events. No one asked why. The seating arrangement had been deliberate. Inside the folder were authorization records carrying Anara's personal login credentials, wire transfer approvals connected to a vendor called Weld Community Financial Services, and printed email chains, supposedly written by Anara, requesting urgent disbursements. The company name was close enough to Anara's non-profit, the Weld Community Trust, to look like an extension of it. Adele Drexel, 65-year-old board member of Drexel Capital and mother-in-law of Anara, studied the documents with an expression that suggested she had already decided. "You spent years watching how this company moved money," Adele said. "We see now what you were learning." Anara Weld Drexel, 37-year-old director of the Weld Community Trust and wife of Lachlan, stood at the far end of the table where a single chair had been placed apart from the others, directly beneath an overhead light. She had arrived that evening carrying one thing, a small clutch she had photographed at the car before entering. Nothing else, no laptop, no documents, no device she had not personally touched. She opened the folder and read carefully. The email timestamps were wrong. One message supposedly sent by Anara on a Tuesday showed server metadata from the following Thursday. The authorization codes used in 3 of the transfers belonged to a sequence Harwick Private Equity Holdings had retired from its platform 14 months ago. Her signature on the vendor formation documents contained a specific pen pressure pattern she recognized from a grant renewal she had signed 3 years earlier. The curve slightly compressed on the second loop, a small irregularity unique to that single document. Whoever had copied it exactly. No person reproduces a signature with that kind of precision twice. Anara closed the folder. "These records were manufactured," she said. Lachlan leaned back. "That is what someone would say." Porter Drexel, 70-year-old founder and chairman emeritus of Drexel Capital and father-in-law of Anara, sat at the head of the table without speaking. Ward Fenn, 58-year-old corporate attorney for the Drexel family, had placed the divorce petition on the table before the food was served. Lachlan's signature was already on it. Beside the petition sat an acknowledgement of service, a written consent to dissolution, and a proposed settlement requiring Anara to surrender the marital property, waive all financial claims, accept responsibility for the missing funds, and agree to silence. Anara read each page the way her father had taught her to read a contract, bottom up, then top down, then again for what was absent. She signed the acknowledgement confirming she had received the petition. She signed the written consent agreeing the marriage should end. When Ward slid the proposed settlement toward her, she returned it unsigned. "I have agreed that this marriage is over," she said. "I will not confess to a crime you built around my name." Lachlan looked at Bex rather than at his wife. "She is protecting what she took." Before Anara could respond, a security officer approached the table, carrying her clutch from the coat check area, and emptied the contents across the linen: keys, a lip balm, her foundation identification, a small sealed packet of tissues, and a flat rectangular data card, matte black, no label. Bex spoke immediately. "That contains company financials she copied before tonight." Anara turned toward her. "No one has opened it. How do you know what is on it?" A brief silence crossed Bex's face, then she recovered. "It matches devices we use in our acquisitions department." June Drexel, 29-year-old communications director at Drexel Capital and younger sister of Lachlan, stood near the far wall. She had watched Bex go to the coat check area 11 minutes after Anara arrived. She had said nothing. Adele had gripped her elbow when June started to move, and the pressure of that grip had kept her in place. Now June stared at the device on the table and felt the weight of what she had allowed. The main doors to the event room opened. Detective Odell Price, 45-year-old lead investigator for the Financial Crimes Division, and the officer assigned to the Drexel Capital case, entered with 2 uniformed officers and a court-issued warrant. Odell presented it to Anara without theater. This was issued 5 days ago, following a formal complaint and reviewed evidence package. Anara read the warrant date. Lachlan had filed the criminal complaint before sending the gala invitation. He had known the arrest was coming. He had arranged the event afterward. The The signing table, the seating chart, the documents, the witnesses, the photographers positioned outside the building's glass entrance to shape the story that would appear on every screen by morning. Quentin Farr, 50-year-old financial crime attorney and legal counsel to Anara's family trust, stepped forward from the corridor and identified himself to the officers. "My client will cooperate fully. I am requesting immediate preservation of all physical evidence, including the device currently on this table, its chain of custody, fingerprint record, and purchase origin." Anara looked at Quentin. "Contact Sylvan Morse at Harwick. Notify the Independent Risk Committee. Preserve every Drexel account record, logins, tokens, beneficiary changes, transfer approvals, independent review only. I am recused." Sylvan Morse, 56-year-old Chief Compliance Officer at Harwick Private Equity Holdings and one of the institution's most trusted senior officers, received the call 3 minutes later. He had worked at Harwick since Callum Sutton ran the firm. He knew Anara's voice before she finished the sentence. The officers moved toward Anara. Lachlan reached across the table and took Bex's hand. That single motion ended something in Anara that nothing else that evening had managed to touch. She held her wrists steady as the restraints closed. The news cycle found its shape by midnight. Every outlet received the same photographs, the ones shot from outside the gala entrance, timed to the exact moment Anara was led through the lobby. Lachlan's publicist had distributed a prepared statement before the officers had finished filing their paperwork. Drexel Capital CEO discovers financial misconduct, protects company assets and employees. Inside a holding area 3 miles from the gala, Anara sat on a narrow bench and watched a mounted television repeat the phrase, "Charity Director Wife." The segment showed Lachlan at a previous company event, described by the reporter as a devoted community advocate. The word "alleged" appeared twice. The reporting moved on. What the segment did not mention, the second transfer, $4,000 had been attempted at 9:47 that evening, 17 minutes after Anara entered the gala. Anara had been seated at the signing table with witnesses on all sides when the approval was submitted. A physical security token from Lachlan's office had authorized it. Quentin arrived at the consultation room with a single folder. He placed it on the table without speaking first, which meant the news was significant. "The second transfer was initiated from Lachlan's executive terminal," he said. "Bex's credentials changed the beneficiary routing. Lachlan's token signed the final authorization." Anara looked at the folder. "He approved a $4 million transfer while I was surrounded by his family." "While you were surrounded by his family, his board members, his attorneys, and 8 photographers, he arranged to document your arrest." The contradiction was not subtle. It was the kind of error that happens when someone designs a frame too quickly and then keeps adding to it after the foundation is already cracked. Anara was released on conditional bond 4 hours later. She surrendered her passport, agreed to all reporting conditions, and obtained bond through the Sutton Meridian Trust without asking anyone for a favor or applying pressure to a single official. Her wealth gave her access to resources. The process still required every proper step. She did not return to the house she had shared with Lachlan. She drove to a property held by the trust. A quiet building she had never once shown him, and found a box near the entrance. Adele had already sent her belongings. Inside, folded clothes with one sleeve crushed under a shoe, broken frames, the small iron pin her father had given her when she turned 12, the anniversary card she had purchased for Lachlan and never delivered, and a handwritten note on Adele's personal stationery. "You were never one of us." Anara set the note on the counter. She did not read it again. She had stayed through 6 years of Adele's cold evaluations and Lachlan's slow disappearance from the man he had been when they met, because she had loved what was real in him before his ambition replaced it. He had once cancelled a board dinner to sit with her at the hospital when her foundation's youngest scholarship recipient broke his arm at practice. He had once learned the names of every family in her program. Then Drexel Capital expanded, and Bex joined the company, and Lachlan's calendar became private, and every question Anara asked became a small accusation in his mind. She had delayed telling him about Harwick each time another reason to wait appeared. Now, she understood she had been waiting for a version of Lachlan that had already stopped existing. Tilda Roark, 47-year-old independent forensic accountant, hired by Harwick's Risk Committee to examine the Drexel Capital accounts without any direction from Anara, worked through 6 consecutive nights reconstructing the transfer history. She found the shell company first. Weld Community Financial Services had been incorporated using a copy of Anara's passport, a signature lifted from a 3-year-old grant renewal she had signed for a local arts program, and a registered address Anara had not used in 9 years. The recovery email tied to the account had been created from Drexel Capital's executive floor. Disbursements from the shell company paid for Bex's travel, a vehicle registered under a holding name, and a significant deposit on a property Lachlan had planned to purchase privately. Regular payments to a separate account matched the timing of a series of unusually large personal expenditures Lachlan had categorized as executive development expenses. Every record planted against Anara pointed back towards someone at the same table who had watched her led away in restraints. Tilda called Quentin on the 7th morning. The data card found in her clutch belongs to a Drexel Capital security order signed by Bex Horn. Purchase date, 3 weeks before the gala. Quentin preserved the documentation through the proper evidence channel and forwarded it to Detective Odell Price with a formal request that the probable cause package be reviewed for external manipulation. That same morning, June Drexel sat alone in her apartment for a long time before she picked up her phone. She had seen Bex carry the data card into the coat check area before Anara arrived. She had seen her come out. Without it, she had said nothing because Adele's grip on her elbow had carried a message June understood clearly. The family holds together. She had stayed at the table and watched Anara's wrists restrained and told herself that silence was not the same as participation. By morning, she knew that was untrue. June sent Quentin a message through an anonymous routing. She included a photograph of Bex entering the coat check area, a time-stamped security log showing the sequence of events, a screenshot of an internal communication confirming the public statement against Anara had been drafted 3 days before the gala, and one sentence. She was set up before she walked through the door. 9 days after the gala, the prosecution notified Quentin that the probable cause package had been reviewed and found to contain evidence inconsistent with its claimed origins. Lennox Aird, 49-year-old financial crimes prosecutor assigned to evaluate the case, presented a formal motion to dismiss the charges. When Anara received the call, she sat with the news for a moment before she said anything. The dismissal would clear her name in the legal record. It would not restore the foundation sponsors who had withdrawn without asking a single question. It would not remove her photograph from the arrest segment still circulating online. It could not return 6 years of a marriage she had believed was real. File the divorce response, she told Quentin, and preserve the civil claims, all of them. Her formal response confirmed that she consented to dissolution of the marriage. It stated clearly that her signature at the Galta table had meant exactly what she had said aloud that evening. She agreed the marriage should end. It had not admitted theft, accepted Lachlan's settlement, or confessed to anything except the truth about her feelings toward a man who had already become someone she did not recognize. When Lachlan received it, he read the first paragraph twice. She is still proceeding? Ward looked at him carefully. She agreed to dissolution at the gala. She never agreed to your settlement terms. Lachlan had expected a call. He had expected negotiation. He had expected that the experience of being restrained in front of his family would produce the kind of exhaustion that makes people agree to things they should not agree to. Anara had returned her response through counsel and not contacted him once. He did not understand yet what that patience was protecting. The morning the account restrictions took effect, Lachlan attempted to release the first payment on a commercial property deal at exactly 9 a.m. The screen returned an error. He tried the operating account, the same message, the acquisition account, the reserve. Each screen displayed identical text: executive authorization suspended, account under independent review, contact corporate counsel. His security token had not expired. The system had simply removed his name. He called Harwick directly. The officer who answered explained the situation in 4 sentences. Lachlan lowered his voice because employees were passing in the corridor outside his open office door. I have banked with this institution for 11 years. That relationship matters. The relationship is acknowledged. The authorization removal reflects current account conditions, not the relationship's history. Lachlan looked at the token in his palm. He had carried it to every major signing, every credit approval, every acquisition close for the past 4 years. That morning it was a piece of metal belonging to a name the institution no longer trusted. He called Ward, who approved this review. The controlling beneficiary of the Sutton Meridian Trust requested full independence and recused herself from all operational decisions. The committee acted on its own authority. What is his name? Ward gathered his documents before answering. You will meet her at the review session tomorrow. Lachlan stared at the word her for a long time after the call ended. The following morning, Lachlan entered Harwick's primary conference room expecting to confront a senior officer who could be pressured into reversing the restrictions. Instead, he found Eamon Colquhoun, 66-year-old chair of Harwick's Independent Risk Committee, at the head of a long table, flanked by 4 independent directors, outside counsel and Tilda. Porter sat 3 chairs from Lachlan. Adele sat beside him. June sat apart from both of them, hands folded, eyes forward. Bex attended with her own attorney, separated from Lachlan by 4 empty seats. Eamon spoke before Lachlan could object. Harwick has held a relationship with Drexel Capital for 11 years. That history is taken seriously. It does not change what this evidence requires. Lachlan placed both hands flat on the table. Bring me the person who authorized this investigation. Eamon looked toward the closed doors at the far end of the room. The controlling beneficiary requested full independence and removed herself from every decision you are challenging. You will meet her now. The doors opened. Anara entered beside Quentin and Sylvan. She wore a simple dark suit and the small iron pin her father had given her. At 12, the one Adele had packed in the box beneath a crushed sleeve. She did not look at the family that had watched her taken away in restraints. She walked to the chair across from Eamon and sat without ceremony. Lachlan stared. For several seconds he appeared to be locating her in his memory. The non-profit director, the quiet wife, who asked too many questions about vendor contracts, the woman he had seated beneath a spotlight at a table arranged to perform her guilt. He was matching that image to the woman seated across from Harwick's full independent committee, next to the chief compliance officer who had worked at this institution since before Lachlan's first business loan. Eamon rose. The independent directors rose with him. Anara Weld Sutton, Eamon said, controlling beneficiary of the Sutton Meridian Trust and principal owner of Harwick Private Equity Holdings. The room became completely still. Adele made a dismissive sound. This is something she arranged after the charges were filed. Porter said nothing. He had recognized the name Sutton the moment it reached him. He had attended a single meeting with Callum Sutton 20 years ago and remembered a man who had rejected a profitable deal because it exposed small investors to unacceptable risk. Porter looked at Anara, then at Lachlan, and understood the cost of every assumption his son had made about the woman he married. "You are Callum Sutton's daughter," Porter said. "Yes." Lachlan's face changed slowly, the way a room changes when the power cuts. Not all at once, but in sections. He remembered the sealed trust disclosure attached to their marriage agreement. He had signed it without reading the addendum. He remembered Anara rebuilding Drexel Capital's acquisition financing analysis during a due diligence crisis 2 years ago, identifying a loan covenant violation that would have triggered a default before he found it himself. He remembered her asking about Harwick's credit terms with a precision he had attributed to a habit of reading everything. He remembered what she had said to Quentin the moment the restraints closed around her wrists. "Preserve every Drexel account record, independent review only. I am recused." Every detail had been present. He had dismissed each one because acknowledging them would have required him to reconsider how he had measured the woman beside him. "You deceived me," he said. Anara looked at him without anger, though the old pain moved beneath her expression in a way people who knew her well could read. "I disclosed that I held a protected family trust before we married. You signed the agreement without reading the attached disclosure. The trust's ownership structure was sealed by law until this year, and by personal circumstance I have carried since I was 15. She described Callum briefly, the security incident when she was a teenager, a photograph in a business journal that identified her as his only heir, and 3 men who approached her outside her school the following week. Her mother had placed herself between them. She was hurt before help arrived. After that, Callum removed Anara from every public succession record and placed the trust's ownership behind documents accessible only to trustees, regulators, and a narrow set of senior officers. Anara had kept the name Weld because her mother had carried it, and because it was the name she had used when she began to understand that wealth made her a target before it made her anything else. "I wanted to know," she said quietly, "whether a man could want to build something with me before he found out what I owned." Lachlan shook his head. "You still let me believe you had nothing. I let you believe I had less than you did. That was a mistake I intended to correct on our anniversary. I was carrying the letter to your office the night I found you with Bex and saw my passport copy on your desk, beside shell company documents you had not yet finished building." She did not raise her voice. She did not reach for leverage. She stated what had happened. "I hid the scale of an inheritance," she said. "You manufactured a crime and used the state to imprison an innocent person. Those are not the same betrayal. Lachlan had no answer. Tilda stood and activated the evidence display. She walked the room through the forensic reconstruction, the copied signature, the retired authorization codes, the cloned network login, the purchase record for the data card, the second transfer approved with Lachlan's token, while Inara sat at the gala table in front of 11 witnesses, and the destination accounts tracing back to shell vendors that had funded Bex's private arrangements and a property Lachlan had planned to hold under a separate holding name. When Tilda reached the slide showing where the $11.4 million had actually gone, Bex looked toward Lachlan. "You told me the records could never trace back to us." Lachlan did not look at her. Bex reached into her portfolio and placed a printed series of messages on the table. The same messages she had provided 3 days earlier to the financial crimes prosecutor in exchange for consideration regarding her own legal exposure. The messages showed Lachlan directing the vendor scheme, authorizing the use of Inara's identity documents, and scheduling the gala event after he learned the arrest warrant had already been issued. One message, sent 8 days before the gala, read, "Make the Weld Company name close enough to her foundation that anyone who sees it connects it to her automatically." The family read in silence. Porter set the final page down. He had spent 40 years protecting the Drexel name on the assumption that the name represented something worth protecting. He looked at what the name had become and understood that he had confused protecting the family with protecting Lachlan from accountability, and that the two had not been the same thing for a very long time. He did not speak to defend his son. Lachlan was removed from Drexel Capital for cause that afternoon. His access tokens were collected. Compensation connected to fraudulent transactions faced clawback review. The property he had planned to purchase through the hidden holding name was restrained under a court order. Bex's cooperation reduced a portion of her legal exposure. It did not restore her position, her access, or the assets purchased with diverted funds. She had believed she was replacing Inara. She discovered instead that Lachlan had been constructing a secondary explanation that would have placed the entire scheme on her. The moment investigators moved too close, she had saved the messages because she was careful. She had needed to be careful because the man she trusted had always been preparing for the possibility that she would stop being useful. June came to Quentin's office 2 days later. She had sent the anonymous message without knowing what Inara owned. She had acted because the weight of what she had permitted had become heavier than the grip on her elbow. She sat across from Inara and said what she had come to say without asking for forgiveness in return. "I watched Bex go into that coat check area. I knew what it meant when the card appeared in your clutch. My mother held my arm and I stayed quiet." Inara looked at her. "You told the truth later." "Not in time." "No," Inara said, "not in time." She did not offer reassurance. She also did not close the door. What you did eventually mattered. What you didn't do earlier also mattered. Both of those things are true at once. June accepted that without argument. Their relationship began from that precise point, not restored, not discarded, but reset at the distance that honesty required. At Heiress, Inara accepted a limited non-executive governance role focused on ethical lending practices, employee protection standards, and financial literacy access for small business owners and working families. She did not position herself above the institution's operating leadership. Independent directors retained full authority. Every major decision required the same review it would have required before her name became public. She placed her father's iron pin on her desk beside a framed photograph of Callum taken outside the Heiress building on its first operating day. He had taught her that every line in a financial record belonged to someone's life, not an abstraction, but food and rent and medicine, and the ability of ordinary people to stay standing when something went wrong. He had taught her by placing a photograph next to a report, by refusing to make easy decisions because they were easy, by protecting her when her name became dangerous, and never making her feel like a burden for it. She had honored that by leaving Drexel Capital's employees unharmed, by recusing herself from every decision that touched his company, by refusing to use Heiress as a weapon, even when she had every reason and all the access. Some mornings she still felt the marks the restraints had left. She did not expect those to disappear quickly, and she did not pretend they already had. 3 weeks after the Heiress session, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to Inara's office. A formal referral flagged by the Trust's governance committee. The kind of case Sylvan had started routed to her directly once her governance role became official. The subject line read, "Urgent. Employee falsely implicated through a corporate payroll account. No legal representation, no financial resources." Anara set the envelope beside her father's photograph. Her marriage had ended, her hiding had ended. She opened the file.